views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. Tonight, it's the debate for the Democratic primary in the 84th Assembly District, a district that includes Hunts Point, Mott Haven, Port Morris, Highbridge, and some of the areas around Yankee Stadium. I am proud to say this is the 65th political debate that I have moderated on BronxNet television, and as we have for the past quarter century, in each debate, we invite all the candidates who are on the ballot. In this case, there are two. Unfortunately, the incumbent Assemblywoman Carmen Arroyo, who has been in office since 1994, has declined our invitation to participate. She sent us this email, and it says, Assemblywoman Arroyo is honored to receive your invitation. Unfortunately, Assemblywoman Arroyo will be declining this invitation. She appreciates the opportunity, but her schedule does not permit her to participate. It is unfortunate that she is not here. We always encourage participation in BronxNet's debate programs. And so, as per our long-standing policy, the entire half hour will go to the other candidate. In this case, it's challenger Amanda Septimo. Ms. Septimo is a former community liaison and district director for Congressman Jose Serrano. And we will tell you tonight's program is co-sponsored by the Bronx Times and also the League of Women Voters, a nonpartisan political organization that advocates for informed and active participation in government and works to increase understanding of major public policy issues. We are always thrilled to have them on board with us. The primary election is Thursday, September 13th. All eligible voters are, of course, encouraged to vote. But right now, please join me in welcoming a candidate for the Assembly in the Bronx's 84th Assembly District, Amanda Septimo. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you for having me, Gary.
Let's just start out. She's not here, and I've said it, and I'm assuming you regret also that she's not here, but we'll give you the opportunity. Talk about your experience. What's relevant of what you did with Congressman Serrano that could apply to the campaign and, of course, to potential work as an Assembly member?
Sure. Well, first, again, I'd love to thank you for providing this opportunity. I think it's important that voters hear directly from the people that are doing the work to represent them and the people that hope to represent them. I do think it's unfortunate that the Assemblywoman couldn't be here. I also regret her not being here because she's been representing the area since 1994, and people deserve to know what that means, what's the work that's been happening, and frankly, what's the work that hasn't been happening. But as you mentioned, I spent 4 years working with Congressman Serrano. But before that, my work in the district goes back many years. It started at the Point CDC. I started there as a community activist. And that's where I really kind of formed my activist core that I think informs all of the other work I do, and really understanding that there's power in organizing, there's power in people making their voices heard, and then there's equally as much power in making sure that that voice is transferred over into policy and making sure that we have policies that represent the needs of our communities. And so I'm excited to take the experience that I gained in the years at the Congressman's office, in the years on the ground at the Point, and bring it to the Assembly, bring a fresh energy to our district. Because if you look, we've really got the worst of the worst in just about every crisis in New York State. We've got the ground zero for the opioid crisis, some of the worst schools in the city, gentrification happening at alarming rates. We've got people being displaced out of their homes. We have one of the highest concentrations of public housing in the city, but a lot of those NYPD developments, like Patterson houses, didn't have heat all winter. And so when you put that all together, it really, I think it's clear that we actually have a crisis in leadership, and we're needing to really own that. And as a community, decide to take a step forward and really making sure that policies start working for us.
You know, I asked about experience. You talk about things that you did and things that you learned. Was there anything that you saw, and we don't want to, this is not a program necessarily to criticize Congressman Serrano, but anything you saw and learned on how not to do things? And when you say, well, this is where government doesn't work,
Sure.
that you can then take that experience and bring that potentially to the Assembly.
Sure. I think that I probably learned those lessons the clearest from Assemblywoman Arroyo, and that's why I'm running for Assembly right now.
Well, I stepped right into it, didn't I? Yeah.
No, but it's true. Honestly, I think Congressman Serrano was a fabulous mentor, and I think a lot of the things that I learned about him are related to how to remain true to your community. But I think in terms of why I'm running for Assembly, Assemblywoman Arroyo just really hasn't been present, right? And I think the fact that she's not here at this debate is one example of that, is a tangible example. But another sort of broader policy example is all of the issues we've had in our NYCHA developments for so many years. Patterson houses have been waiting on a boiler for almost 10 years. The state has put aside money for NYCHA in those years, but none of it makes it to our district. And so those are the sorts of things that happen where you have to ask the question, where is our advocate? Where is our advocate in Albany? Where is our voice in the Assembly? And what's happening to make it so that these policies and these programs are just not making it all the way to our community?
I do want to talk about that money from NYCHA in a moment. I just want to finish this subject. There was that disturbing story in the Daily News a couple of years ago that she was not prosecuted for what did turn out to be improper use of campaign funds, according to the paper, withdrawn at Empire Casino up to the tune of potentially $3,300 taken out of campaign funds. And she had a record that dated back to 2006 of not filing campaign finance reports. Do we not have strong enough laws and strong enough rules and guidelines when it comes to campaign finance malfeasance and the use of those funds and the handling of those funds, which of course go through every candidate?
Sure. I think that Albany could always use more transparency, but I do think that there is a level that you reach where when people want to do bad things, you won't be able to stop them. And so you can legislate until you're blue in the face, you can make rules until you can't come up with any new ones, but if people want to find ways to skirt those rules, they will. And I think legislators have a real responsibility to really set the standard for integrity and for transparency and for honesty for our district and for our community. And so it's disappointing to see Assemblywoman Arroyo decide to use campaign funds at a casino, not because there's any immediate tangible damage, but because it does damage the larger reputation, right, of corruption and culture that exists in
really,
Albany,
yeah.
right? And people losing confidence, and I think we're really in a place where people already don't have enough confidence in their government to represent them and to really do what's right. And it's sad to see that fed by our representative, and I look forward to changing that.
If you simply look at a map of the district and you know something about what's been going on in the Bronx, and you see the whole chunk of it that's right there in the South Bronx with Port Morris and Mott Haven, and further up north, certainly to the east, is Hunts Point. The word that comes up is development, and because we know that there's what is now the Brookfield Development is going to happen in the southernmost tip, right by the Harlem River there. You made this statement, I think it was in a video that you made, that the core of gentrification is displacement. The development is coming. There are many people excited about it for very good reasons, because I think there's hope that it will bring new monies to the Bronx. It'll bring new energies to the Bronx. There is, of course, at the same time, the balance is the fear of displacement. Can it be prevented? Can people who have worked hard and lived here and made sacrifices be protected in some form? Or is this just one of the things that really is going to have to happen in order to kind of change the culture and the mood and the economy down in that part of the Bronx?
Sure. I do think we're headed straight in the direction of a lot of development. I absolutely do not think it's an inevitable process that people get displaced from their communities as the communities grow and develop. I think thoughtful policy can make it so that people in their communities that work to rebuild the Bronx can stay there. So two quick ways that I think we can do that. First is giving people meaningful pathways out of poverty through economic development, right? So that means access to jobs that allow them to provide for their families and stay in these communities as they get more expensive, make the decisions to stay if they want to. A lot of those jobs exist in the tech sector, in the green job sector, and in construction. And if we really make the decision to invest in training opportunities for people in our districts, then we can make sure that they're able to participate in the growth, right, and are not automatically displaced.
There was recently a story about Hostos Community College participating with a group that was going to be doing training for construction jobs. But ironically, you know, one of the buildings, I forget which one it is, one of the buildings down there is going to be you know, kind of a co-working space that is designed for tech jobs. So on one on one end, you say, well, wait a minute, we don't want the development. On the other hand, that is going to bring tech jobs. I guess the question is how to make sure it's Bronx people that go in there and get the benefit of those jobs and the training and everything else, as opposed to people from elsewhere coming in and moving those people out.
And that's the question, and that's also the work that we have to do. And it can be done pretty easily, but you just need the right amount of advocacy and leadership on it. So we give away unbelievable amounts of tax incentives to make sure that development happens in our areas. Those tax incentives are a huge opportunity to demand more in terms of the process, right? So demanding that Bronxites are meaningfully included, and also talking to Bronxites about what meaningful inclusion looks like, right? It doesn't just mean building a community room that people can throw birthday parties in. It means providing job opportunities and making sure that people are held accountable when they say they're going to provide those jobs. If they don't, clawing back tax incentives. If you and I make an agreement, and part of that deal was that you get X amount of millions of dollars for your building, if you don't hold up your end of the bargain, then you have to pay back New Yorkers the money that they gave you.
And you see that tax incentive carrot as effective. In other words, you would see that as a method.
I think it's a method that we're already. No, absolutely. I think we are already giving away incentives, and we're not getting enough back from them. So I think you need to ramp up the level of demand and transparency and accountability on the other side of those incentives.
What a sensitive part of the Bronx that whole section is, and I believe it was literally, you know, just today, it was revealed directly. The city selected that spot on Concord Avenue for the jail, or one of the replacement jails for Rikers Island. What is your thought about that? I mean, at this point, they examined the one by the Hall of Justice over on 161st. I mean, I'm not familiar at the moment why that was rejected.
Sure.
What happens now? Is there any recourse? Is that going to happen? And if it does happen, the Diego Beekman project is now going to have to relook at that. What do you think? What's your vision of that area at this point?
Yeah, so I think Diego Beekman as an organization had incredible plans for that site, and I would really like to see those plans continue to be honored and see those through. I absolutely think we need to close Rikers. I absolutely do not think that jail should be there.
If you are elected, I guess even as an advocate, you would continue to oppose it.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think it's honestly, no, absolutely. And 10 years ago, actually, we beat a jail in Hunts Point that the city was trying to build. And it's disrespectful, and it is sad that our community every 10 years is having to beat a new jail when we already have a few, and there are entire boroughs, Staten Island, right, that don't get any. And I felt disrespected when I saw the announcement that Staten Island wouldn't even be considered for a jail, because I know that Staten Island has a population of inmates on Rikers. And so we recently just saw the city pass a waste equity bill, talking about how to make sure that there's equity in how the city handles trash. We need to apply that same lens of equity to every other issue, and that includes jails, that includes correction, that includes rehabilitation, because it cannot be the case that every single study that you do somehow leads to the South Bronx being the best place for a jail.
Were you satisfied with the Yankee Stadium development? Did you think that was a good plan?
You know, I think the
I realize we're at this point, the stadium is there, it's been done, but I think that would be a clue to what your thinking is about these kinds of projects.
Right. I think that the Yankee Stadium deal is a great example of a project that didn't go far enough to demand concessions for incentives that we use. We talk about tax breaks as if they're this thing that don't really exist, but there are real dollar amounts connected to tax breaks, and those are real dollars that are not making it into our schools, that are not making it to job training programs. So when you're willing to trade in those dollars, I think you need to be making sure that you're getting a fair amount back, and I don't think we saw that happen in the Yankee Stadium deal.
People who sat at the table, many of them no longer in office, didn't make that happen. Well, I set you up because now there's a dialogue about a soccer stadium
Yeah.
on 153rd Street.
Yeah.
Do you like the idea? This is that the GAL manufacturing would come down. I think one of the Yankee garages would come down. You like it? What do you think?
I think any development that brings jobs to the area is good. I would really like to see organizations that can afford to build their institutions pay for them themselves. I really want us to really start looking at using our tax dollars for our communities and not necessarily for private industry. I think we need to take a break and really reevaluate our strategy altogether.
It's very interesting because we have the just to digress for a moment. We have the new stadium in New Jersey, which is paid for with public monies. Both Yankee Stadium and Citi Field were paid for with public monies. The one project that was not was the Madison Square Garden renovation. Maybe that's a model.
Absolutely.
I'm just suggesting that. Let's go back to talk about housing. I know it's something that's very important to you. There are 10 public housing projects. In NYCHA projects in that district. Talk about that funding that you are concerned about that came about and somehow never made it to your district.
Sure. I think we've seen for the last few years that NYCHA has really been in crisis, and I applaud the state government for working to step up some of its commitment and making sure to funnel some emergency dollars into NYCHA. And work to get people quality living conditions or closer, a step closer in that direction. There was about $200 million kind of set aside. None of it ever made it to our district. And I think that speaks to,
Is that what you said?
it's something
million?
like that, yes.
Wow.
I'm actually certain it's 200 million. And so that, I think, is the perfect example of what happens when you don't have an advocate in Albany, because we all know that there's an overwhelming majority of Democrats in the assembly, so votes and legislation typically go the way that we need it to for our community, at least in the assembly chamber. But when you're talking about resources, it's the members that are present, that are showing up, that are speaking out, that are going to Speaker Carl Hasty and saying, hey, I need resources for my district. This is what my district needs. Those are the district that see results. And we have not had that. And it's clear if you walk in any part of the district that there are ways that we could be improving, and NYCHA is the clearest example of that, where we saw developments that didn't have heat this winter really dominate news cycles at some point. And we had the governor visit, we had the borough president visit, but when you look beyond the headlines and into the work, there's still not a real plan to get money to fund these boilers that these buildings need. And Gary, let me tell you, there's always another winter coming. And so in just a few months, people are once again going to be heading into the coldest winter of the season and not having heat in their homes, having to go to bed fully dressed. And I spend a lot of time at Patterson Houses, and I think that when I meet people who say, my child's asthma is worse than it's ever been because it's so cold in our apartment, and when you feel the human impact of these policy decisions that are just lacking, I think it really drives home how much we actually need change, because we need a voice that's speaking up for us.
You just touched on it. The impact of, you say, well, okay, they didn't have heat, although now we also have the lead paint issue that has run rampant, and we've had Council Member Richie Torres on the show already a couple of times to talk about how to deal with that. I think you don't, I don't necessarily you, but people don't understand the real impact that takes, that a child who goes to school, and parents work really hard to kill, and it is, I've been a parent, I am a parent, I know what it's like to get that child to school every day and make sure they do their homework, and then they come home to a place where the paint is peeling, there may be vermin in the apartment, the heat and hot water doesn't work, and that will impact the overall health and well-being. Let's talk a little bit about our schools and where those kids go to school, so that if they do have an unfortunate circumstance at home, they find a place at school where they can grow and thrive, etc. You have made a point on your website about resources in schools. What resources are you concerned about, and how? I mean, to me, it's just a dollar amount. You put money into it, you can have more resources. How do you see it, the problems and solutions?
Sure. So I think the problem as it relates to resources in our schools definitely is related to the equity and funding of our schools. There is a reason why public schools in Manhattan look different than the schools in the Bronx, and that reason is dollars, right? When it comes down to it, we don't have state funding formulas that account for differences in population needs, and I think that that's something that I'm really excited to get into Albany to talk about and to work on. But I think in the meantime, schools are still suffering, right? And so we need to come up.
I want to just interrupt about
Sure.
that. So for you, it's a matter of funding formulas, because it's
Yep.
not necessarily total dollars amount. You're saying that schools that may be identified as needs
Right.
need to get more money, and what you're alleging is that that doesn't happen right now.
That's
it seems rather logical it would, but
Yeah.
you're saying it doesn't.
No, it absolutely doesn't. The Campaign for Fiscal Equity, I think, is an example of that, right? Where the court ruled that schools in New York City were being shortchanged, that we have students that have higher need and need higher dollars and are not getting it. And so the fact that our schools are owed millions of dollars from that case, right, which was 10 years ago at this point, and every year continue to be shortchanged, that adds up, right? And every year kids are advancing and existing in schools that are not able to give them the full education that they deserve. And that you asked about resources and what that looks like on the ground. I think it looks like different things depending on the school, right? No two schools are the same. So one school might need access to technology and a computer lab that their kids need to be competitive as students in a 2018 world. But then there might be another school that needs to fund a guidance counselor and can't do that, or needs to fund a school therapist and can't do that. And I think that
Something as simple as that.
right, that is definitely part of all of those things are part of a complete educational experience. I think especially when you're talking about a place like the South Bronx that has such high needs. And so it's really irresponsible of us as leaders to not be amplifying that conversation.
And so the process right now as it exists in the city is that schools that are quote unquote failing get closed. What you're saying is maybe we ought to look at funding formulas, and then you don't have to close them.
Absolutely.
Am I assessing this
No,
properly?
absolutely.
You have on your website something called an Adopt a School
Yes,
program.
yes.
I thought it was an interesting concept. What do you
you.
mean by that? And aren't we doing stuff like that already?
Well, so the Adopt a School program is meant to mirror something like the city's Adopt a Highway program, where a company is placed with a highway to kind of maintain it, and they get kind of promotion for doing so. We're not going to rename any schools, like the Facebook school or anything like that, but it is an opportunity to pair companies that are doing work in New York City with schools that are in need. And different schools, again, will have different needs, and that's okay, because some companies will want to write a check for a tax write-off, and that's fine because some schools just need computer labs, but I think there are other companies that would be willing to lean in, right? And so supporting the schools through physical resources, but also offering mentorship opportunities, internship opportunities, professional development support.
Public-private partnerships.
Exactly right. But working to kind of formalize those, right? I think in government, we rely a lot on the private sector to do leading, but government's got to get out in front and start leading and meeting some of the responsibilities that we have as institutions. And so I'm excited to pilot an Adopt a School program in our district, prove that it works, and that we need to get our students the resources they need if we want them to be competitive, and then work on formalizing that on the state level.
Let's talk about criminal justice for what little time we have left. The 40th Precinct is getting a new building.
Yeah.
I don't know the timing on the construction of that building, but they will be getting a new building. What's your assessment of the police community relations? The NYPD has done a lot of work, whether people like it or think it's been successful, that's open for debate. But what's your assessment of police community relations in a precinct that, listen, the Times did an expose about the 40th Precinct. It's had its problems, and it has difficult issues, whether it be drug use and crime and certainly poverty and all the other things, homelessness and go with it. What's your assessment?
I think police community relations are always a sort of delicate subject. I think that in the police community relations are related to larger criminal justice issues. I think it's all related to the fact that people don't have confidence in our systems as they exist, right? That our criminal justice system is the furthest thing from actual justice. And to really move people in the direction of confidence, I think we need major reforms like ending cash bail, open discovery, and making sure that we're taking steps to make it so that there's actual justice in our criminal justice system, so that people don't feel like they're being unnecessarily targeted or picked on. And I think that feeling bleeds into a sense of not having enough confidence in the other institutions connected to the criminal justice system, and that means policing as well.
Has the NYPD's efforts been useful? In other words, to really work with people and greet people and look them in the eye. Do you think it's had an effect? Or is there still significant resentment out there about the police officers that we need so badly.
Yeah, I mean, I think every industry has bad eggs, and I think NYPD is no exception. I've heard horrible stories from people in my district as I door knock every day, but then I've heard some good ones as well. So I think, like anything, we're making progress, but we absolutely have a ways to go in terms of police-community relations.
If this had been a formal debate between two candidates, as we had hoped, we would give each candidate a 1-minute chance to make a closing statement. So we're going to give you that opportunity. You may as well. We don't normally do that on one-to-one interviews, but we were planning a debate, and so we'll give you the same opportunity. You can make a closing statement.
Great. Am I direct to camera?
Sure, you can
okay,
go right to
great.
the camera.
Well, my name is Amanda Septimo, and I want to thank everyone for taking the opportunity to listen. I think for a long time, the South Bronx has been left behind in a lot of ways. We haven't had a voice or an advocate in Albany that can really step up to the plate and say, listen, enough is enough. We deserve better than this, and we deserve that type of leadership as a community. I've lived here my whole life, and I'm looking forward to bringing that energy and that voice and that spirit to our district, and I hope that you all will join me in that effort. So please vote September 13th. Looking forward to bringing change to our community.
Ms. Septimo, thank you so much for your presentation today. Again, we certainly regret that the Assemblywoman chose or said she couldn't be here. We'll let people evaluate that on their own. But I know you will agree with me. You already mentioned it, that every eligible voter should come out to vote on Thursday, September 13th. And our viewers, please note it's a primary election, so only voters enrolled in the Democratic Party in the 84th Assembly District can vote in this race. Also, we want to thank our co-sponsors, and they are once again the Bronx Times and also the League of Women Voters. For more information, you can call the League of Women Voters at 212-725-3541. Now, next week, we'll do another. There will be the candidates in the Democratic primary for the open seat in the 87th Assembly District. So we hope you will join us then, and we thank you for watching tonight. We thank our producer, who's Helen Greenberg. Our director is Nicholas Marrero. And please, especially if you're eligible, make sure to vote on September 13th. Thank you, Ms. Septimo, and good night.
I appreciate that. Thank you.